Professor, a grim situation. Give us, please, first your thoughts, and then allow me, please, to ask you some searching questions.
Thank you, George. First of all, with regards to your poll, I think Jake Sullivan, if he had the right to vote, or if he had the courage to vote, or if he would admit the truth once again, as he did in his email to Hillary Clinton on February the 12th, 2012, that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, he would vote that it is a CIA-backed organization. ISIS and Al-Qaeda were both supported by the CIA. We know from that email, we know from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 that Turkey and despots in the Persian Gulf and U.S. allies in the region were wanted to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq to isolate Syria. Well, what was that entity? It was ISIS. So they created Al-Qaeda. They supported ISIS. And then Kerry said we allowed, in a leaked audio, he said we and Qatar and Turkey and Saudi Arabia funded ISIS. And he admitted that they allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus. And I think it was Obama, when ISIS invaded Iraq, in, I think, an interview with Atlantic, he said we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki. So, and Hillary Clinton once admitted that we created Al-Qaeda. It's clear as day who is behind these groups. It's clear as day that Erdogan is the person first and foremost responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians. I know you know of Serena Shim. She was the Press TV reporter, Lebanese American, who was reporting from the Turkish border, I think in 2012, when Ain al-Arab, or Kobani, was under assault from ISIS. She reported from the border that World Food Organization trucks were being used to take in weapons and troops into Syria from Turkey. And then Turkish intelligence called her a spy, and she went on Press TV live, said that I'm scared. I've been accused of being of espionage, and I'm afraid. That very same day she was killed. Turkish intelligence murdered her in a car when a truck hit her car. So Netanyahu has succeeded in raising the black flags of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Damascus. And those who support Erdogan and his actions, they cannot hide behind these facts. Assad, those who say Assad killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, they are the ones who are supporting the people who actually carried out these atrocities.
Well, these are facts that you have adduced, but there are other facts. The reality is now that the Palestinians have suffered a strategic defeat of almost incalculable magnitude. They are now isolated. The only people giving them weapons to resist were Iran, and the only people who were fighting as an organized army on their behalf were the Lebanese resistance. Now, as a result of what's happened, Iran cannot reach these people. They cannot be resupplied. They are in mortal danger of fatal, final defeat. Do you accept that, first of all, and then we'll go on to what could have been done to avoid this?
It is a very dangerous situation because we know that Erdogan has never been serious about the Palestinian cause. In fact, Erdogan has always tried to corrupt the Palestinian cause. He gives scholarships to Palestinians. He'd host leaders of the Palestinian movements in Turkey and give their family a very good life, and therefore he gained influence that way. But he never sent a single bullet to Gaza. He never sent a single bullet to the West Bank. He once said, before Israel invaded Lebanon, that if they attack Lebanon, we'll send troops there. He didn't send a bullet to Lebanon. And I should add, now that Syria has fallen, that Iran and Syria were supporting the West Bank. The Syrians were supporting the West Bank until now. So now the West Bank is going to have a much more difficult time protecting itself as these genocidal monsters seek to ethnically cleanse that territory. Hezbollah is in a much more difficult position. In fact, today, as I'm sure you know, Netanyahu went to the Golan. Not only did the Israeli regime move further into Syria today, but they also have been bombing key assets of Syria all day, destroying their key infrastructure. But what he said was really interesting. He said that because we weakened Hezbollah, we helped bring about the fall of Syria. So, and when he accepted the ceasefire, he said we have to deal with the so-called Iran threat. What was that threat? It's Syria. And immediately after the ceasefire, Erdogan, the traitor, invaded Syria. When Iran was distracted, when Hezbollah was focused on the south, because the ceasefire was not a real ceasefire. Every day the Israelis are killing the Lebanese. Yesterday, I think 4 were murdered. Today, 3 were murdered, at least until this afternoon. The border between Palestine and Lebanon is very dangerous, the situation right now. So the treachery of Erdogan, I think, will be remembered in history. So yes, I agree. The situation for the Palestinian people is very dangerous right now. It's precarious. And I can't say it's been a catastrophic defeat, but without a doubt, the victory, the defeat of Israel is now, I think, an open question. Israel lost in Gaza, regardless of the genocide. It delegitimized itself in the eyes of the world, and it failed to capture it. It lost in Lebanon. It failed to capture Lebanon, and it exposed itself again as genocidal and weak in the face of Hezbollah. But now, after what Erdogan has done, the equation has changed. And this Israeli defeat is, I can't call it a defeat anymore. And the delegitimization of the Israeli regime, which I think is the biggest achievement of the last 14 months, the delegitimization in the eyes of the world, is now being forgotten. Because no one is, as you said a few minutes earlier, no one is talking about the ongoing Holocaust. As you and I are speaking, there's a Holocaust going on. Nothing has changed. They're slaughtering Palestinians day and night in Gaza. And I ask your viewers to constantly be active in the coming hours and days and keep sending out the message that there's a Holocaust going on. The Israeli regime has to be there. Its actions have to be remembered by people in the coming days and weeks, and the delegitimization of the regime has to be maintained. But yes, I agree. This victory, because the Israelis had to achieve victory, otherwise it's a defeat. And until now, it was a defeat for Israel. But the last 10 days, thanks to the Erdogan-Netanyahu alliance, I can no longer say that.
Well, let me say what you're not able to say, or don't feel able to say. It's an Israeli victory. Israel has snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat. Because all this talk of delegitimization and their name is blackened throughout the world and so on, that doesn't add up to a row of beans. Unless the people fighting the occupation are able to go on fighting it, it's a victory for the occupier. So that brings me to, well, let me in parenthesis ask you this. I asked it publicly today for the first time in 14 months. October the 7th now looks like a very bad idea. And it makes you wonder, whose idea was it anyway? Because you can say that Israel paid a big price in soft power, paid a big price in its reputation and so on, but all the key players still support it, arm it, give weapons to it. And those that stand against them have now suffered a strategic defeat. Do you have a view on that?
I'm sure that the great martyr Yahya Sinwar never expected Erdogan to carry out this act of treachery at this point. In fact, as you know, Yahya Sinwar said very openly that he was against what was happening in Syria, and that he saw Syria as a part of this axis of resistance. Who has more right to talk about Palestine, Yahya Sinwar or Erdogan, who's selling oil, cheap Baku, who's sending cheap Baku oil to Israel, who's been aiding the genocide for 14 months, who maintains diplomatic relations, who never once told Aliyev to stop selling oil, who continues to do indirect trade with the Israeli regime, and who now has brought the black flags to Damascus. I don't think Yahya Sinwar ever thought for a moment that this would happen under these circumstances. He couldn't even wait a few weeks to carry out his attack. So the Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, what could they do? They were in a concentration camp. The West Bank was being ethnically cleansed. East Jerusalem was being ethnically cleansed. I understand why they did it. And I don't think any of us can see the future. Hezbollah made the greatest sacrifices for the people of Gaza because they did so willingly since October the 8th. But what else could Hezbollah do but stand with the people of Palestine and the people of Gaza? And they paid a huge price for their willing assistance to the people of Gaza. But they didn't foresee the betrayal of Erdogan, the treason that Erdogan carried out. The people of Turkey are supportive of the Palestinians. But Erdogan knows very well who his henchmen are. He knows exactly who ISIS is. He is ISIS. He is Al-Qaeda because he helped them grow. He allowed them to destroy Syria and Iraq. He promoted them. And now, if he is such a moral man, and he and his foreign minister, another criminal, if they are so moral, why did they want to mend relations with President Assad? If President Assad is such a monster, why were they willing to turn around and normalize with Syria? And then again, turn around later and overthrow Syria. What morality is that? He has no principles whatsoever. So how could Yahya Sinwar, who led that operation, be blamed for the criminal behavior of the Erdogan regime and his henchmen? I cannot blame Hamas or Islamic Jihad for what they did.
Yeah. Finally, Professor, it's a difficult question to ask. You might find it difficult to answer. You have concentrated on damning Erdogan, and very few watching will disagree with you. But why did Iran not see this coming? Iran is or was everywhere in Syria. They had the most intensive understanding of the situation in Syria. Why did they not see this coming? Why did they not take steps to preclude it?
I don't want to blame President Assad now that this is over. It's easy to blame people afterwards. It was a very critical situation. But a number of things happened. First of all, the Syrian government decreased Iran's presence in Syria after the peace in Idlib. And Iran, by the way, was opposed to this. The Russians wanted this peace. Iran felt that Idlib would become a crisis later on. But the Syrian government wanted rapprochement with Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and they distanced themselves from Iran. And the Iranian footprint in Israel, as in Syria, as they say, was decreased. So Iran had far few people in Syria over the past 3-4 years than before. The second issue is, and you alluded to that, is that the problem lied with the fact that the United States emptied Syria. They were stealing the oil and the agricultural products from the northeast of the country, and they used the genocidal sanctions, the Caesar sanctions, to starve the people. A general in the Syrian army was earning $40 a month, and these al-Qaeda terrorists were earning up to $2,000 a month. So when the economy was emptied, the army was weak, and then social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they and the Arabic media, these despots in the region, and the Western media, all of them carried out a very effective psychological warfare campaign against the Syrians when this started. So the Syrian army wasn't able to defend itself. And of course Hezbollah, because as Netanyahu himself said, was back in Lebanon. They were hurt, and they were prepared to fight for the south. So they weren't in Syria. The Iranians didn't have much of a presence. And then when this attack started, Iran had to mobilize, and they did start bringing people in. A significant number of people were in Damascus. But, and this I don't want to blame President Assad, but he changed his position twice over the last 2-3 days. The Iranians were willing to come in, just like in 2013. Remember, Iran did not enter, nor did Hezbollah, until 2013, after tens of thousands of foreign fighters were brought into Syria by Erdogan and Western intelligence agencies, and with funding from these despots in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians were prepared. They told him so, that they were prepared to fight against al-Qaeda. He changed his position, and the timing, there was very little time. Unless President Assad was very firm that, yes, come in and the army will cooperate with you, Iran could not go into Syria and fight on its own without the support of the president and the government. It would fail. It would be a catastrophe. So the Iranians came in, and I don't want to go into great detail. I don't know everything now, but I know some of what happened. But President Assad, for whatever reason, people were giving him different information. Perhaps people were calling him from abroad. At one point he said, I'll leave. At one point he said, I'll stand. And then he said, I'll leave. But the Iranians cannot fight in another country without the full support of the president of that country. But anyway, I don't blame him, because the situation was critical. I don't know the circumstances, but the treason came from the north. This was about more than just Syria. And have no doubt that this will cause instability across Asia. There are up to 5,000 Chinese fighters in Syria, thousands from Central Asia, especially Uzbekistan. And these people will destabilize much of Asia if they can. They're right now euphoric. They're drunk in their victory, and they will be a danger in future. Erdogan has created a monster that can destabilize much of Asia, and I think the Americans want that. But of course, this is not going to benefit the West. This instability is not going to benefit the region either. No one is going to go unscathed. Only two people benefit. One is Erdogan and one is Netanyahu. And these two men are very similar. Erdogan does it for himself, not for Turkey. And Netanyahu does it for himself and not his Zionist colleagues and the other Zionist colonizers. But in any case, I think that Al-Qaeda will ultimately fail. It's going to be a very big burden on the people of Turkey. It's going to destabilize the region. And I think that Erdogan, things are very different today, George, from what it was in 2011, 12, 13. I think you know this better, much better than I. People are much more awake today to the reality of what's going on in our region than back then. Back then, there were a few lone voices telling people what was going on, and most did not believe it. Now everyone knows what Jake Sullivan said. Now everyone knows what Kerry said. Now everyone knows what the Defense Intelligence Agency said, what General Michael Flynn said on Al Jazeera. Everyone knows that the CIA, Israel, and Erdogan are in bed together, and that Erdogan sacrificed the people of Palestine. And we will see in the weeks and months ahead, as I think you alluded to at the beginning of the show, that Erdogan and Al-Qaeda will do nothing to harm the Israeli regime.
I infer then your answer to my next question, but let me ask it anyway. It's my final one, and I'm grateful for your time. There are people, I don't know enough about it to have a view myself, but there are people who do know a lot about it, who think that the change of president in Iran has changed, at least, if not the political line, then at least the enthusiasm for the political line, the resolve to enforce the political line. Is there anything in that, in your view?
I understand that position. I think that there are some people in the current administration that are naive about the United States, who think that if we show a willingness to compromise, that the Americans will compromise. I don't believe that that is the case. I believe that the Americans will, as always, they'll misinterpret this as a sign of weakness, and they'll become more aggressive. That is what history has told us. That is what happened after the nuclear deal. That is what happened after when we were named the axis of evil. There are hosts of instances where the Iranians showed goodwill and they were slapped, and their hands were slapped by the Americans. But I don't believe that the policy of Iran has changed towards the Palestinian people or towards Syria. The Iranians were prepared to move in. The Iranians did send a large number of advisors. They were in Damascus, and troops under Iranian supervision were in Damascus and in the areas around that. They had come in from abroad. But, as I said, they needed the full consent and support of the president and thus the cooperation of the Syrian Arab Army in order to begin fighting. So Iran was prepared to make sacrifices. But if the Syrian president was not committed, and if the Syrian army was not committed, then it would have been a failure, and you would have had a lot of dead Iranians and forces from Iraq and Lebanon and Afghanistan, and people would say, why did that happen? So I don't believe that Iran's general policy has changed. I don't believe the Iranian president has these views, but I do believe that there are people in the administration who are naive about the United States, and perhaps some of their views have emboldened the Americans and their allies, unfortunately. But policy has not changed in Tehran.